Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, which is the fourth and final of this joint series between CICA and NEC. So today we will present and discuss the NEC clause X29 on climate change. We have the great pleasure to have with us two experimented speakers today. Lewis Barlow, whom I will introduce in a few seconds, will present the clause, and Andrea Costanzi will give us a perspective of the contractor. As usual, we will also keep some time for a questions and answers session at the end. And for your information, we will share the slides with you after the webinar. So I will first introduce Lewis. Lewis Barlow is co-chair of the ICE Decarbonization Advisory Board, a member of both the PAS 2080-2023 steering group and its technical advisory panel, and was recently selected as the ICE Trustee for Carbon and Climate. He led the development of the ICE decarbonization strategy, helping to ensure that its 97,000 members worldwide are suitably equipped to decarbonize the built environments. Lewis also provides decarbonization expertise to the Scottish, Welsh, and UK governments through the Freeport and Regional Growth Deals programs. This involves expert training and advice on the practical application of UK Treasury Green Book, Whole Life Carbon Criteria, including strategies for high-level carbon estimation in economic appraisals. So Lewis, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and your presentation with the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Right, so let's start off by sharing the screen. Okay, there we go. So I have about 15 minutes to give a good outline to NEC X29, but to be able to do that, I have to explain something important first, which is the PAS 2080 that was just mentioned there. So I'm going to cover quite a lot in a short space of time, but I will provide lots of links, and hopefully this is the foundation upon which you can follow up after this. So you may see in the title there, Making Carbon Reduction Contractual, has a asterisk next to it. It's not just about carbon, it's really anything you can imagine. It's about climate change requirements, but you can use X29 to put in all sorts of imaginative requirements, as you'll hopefully see soon. So why is this important to us, particularly as engineers, infrastructure professionals, civil engineers, people involved across the built environment in constructing and operating all sorts of things? Well, it's been known for some years that the work that we do and how it's used is seriously connected to climate change. This is the front cover of the NCE magazine a few years ago, where the editorial said decarbonization is fundamentally an engineering problem, a civil engineering problem at that. It's mostly true that because it's about science, technology, engineering, mathematics, numbers, essentially. It's unfortunately not as simple as that. It's also behavioral, cultural, psychological. There's all sorts of extra tricky issues. But if we can boil things down to the numbers, we're more likely to achieve success and net zero. Now, this is a UK picture here, but the same pattern applies in all developed countries. Of the 100% of the greenhouse gas or carbon emissions that emanate from the UK, most, at least 53%, are associated with infrastructure. So that's not just transportation infrastructure, it's communications, energy, water, wastewater, everything that connects us up, which is really what we're involved with. So we are essentially involved with most greenhouse gas emissions around the world, when you put it like that. So we have a bit of a serious responsibility to try and tackle it. But the decarbonization bar, is one way of putting this, is too low. At the moment, it's too easy to claim that you're dealing with carbon on a project. Let's give an example. Carbon is effectively an atmospheric pollutant. We normally think about pollutants going into the ground or the groundwater, but this is more or less an invisible one that's going up into the sky. And if you were an industry, a factory, and you were polluting a river, and you said, I'm going to reduce the pollution by 30% this year, the regulator would say, I don't care about that. You need to reduce the pollution to acceptable limits or you're going to be prosecuted. Now, at the moment, quite often in development and infrastructure, if you say you've reduced the carbon by 30%, people will think that's quite good, and you might even win an award. So we have to start looking at carbon as a proper pollutant and have quantified ways to manage and mitigate it. So this is a background, hopefully you can see, to X29, which is coming up shortly. The drivers for carbon reduction can be categorized in two ways, I think. High-level things, like needing to do the right thing. You know, we feel a responsibility once we understand what's going on. But we have the Paris Agreement, with the requirement to keep global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees. In the UK, we have the Climate Change Act, and there are similar acts around the world. We have the EU Directive 2014-52, which is about environmental impact assessment and the requirement to strengthen the approach to carbon and greenhouse gases through that. In the UK, we have a Treasury Green Book, which is a way of economically evaluating carbon emissions and making decisions on that basis. So these are quite high-level things. If you read these things and these documents and these agreements, you don't really have an idea of how to do this on a project. Then we have more project-specific things that are driving carbon reduction, like planning requirements to get planning permission for certain things. The carbon net is closing. You know, it's getting more and more specific about what we have to do on a project-by-project basis. Environmental impact assessment requirements, starting to see taxation, carbon taxation. In London, we have this for major developments, something called a carbon offset fund, which is assigns a price to carbon and the developer has to pay. So there's another incentive to reduce carbon. Business cases, more and more incorporating carbon. And we have to align with organizational objectives too. So it's not just about the project, it's what are all the organizations doing in the supply chain and how are they relevant? So there's been a movement over the last 10 years from emotion, you know, and high-level ethics and needing to do the right thing to practically, how are we actually practically going to do this? And how are we going to make it work? How are we going to make it stick, give it teeth, make it contractual? So this is the prelude to X29. This is not part of X29, but it sits next to, or I would say in front of X29. You don't have to deploy PAS 2080, but it helps an awful lot. It's carbon management in buildings and infrastructure, republished last year. It's a process for managing carbon across the supply chain, the world's first. And it's central to the achievement of net zero because this is a methodology that will minimize carbon in infrastructure, which, as I've just mentioned, is responsible directly or indirectly for most greenhouse gas emissions around the world. The basic process of PAS 2080 is you baseline your whole life carbon emissions impact. So that's a number as soon as possible in the process. You set carbon reduction targets. So you can probably see where the X29 idea is going to start to come through shortly. And then you proactively manage that reduction across the supply chain. And the supply chain members are explicitly set out in PAS 2080. Underpinning all of this is leadership. It's got to be driven from the top, quantification, as I mentioned earlier on, and challenge, recognizing that the way we do things at the moment is unsustainable. So everyone has to challenge the process to improve it. We can't just say, this is the way we've always done things. We have to be able to be agile and improve things. 4 stakeholder groups are described in PAS 2080, the asset owner, or the sort of ultimate client group. There's the designers, constructors, and product and material suppliers. And each of these groups have requirements under PAS 2080 to ultimately work together and minimize whole life carbon. So I won't go into any detail on this, but suffice to say, it's non-negotiable what we're talking about here when we talk about whole life carbon. It's really what you see on the screen. It's ABC, that's before use, use, and end of life. You know, when a building or a road ultimately reaches the end of its usable life, maybe 60, 70, 100 years, and it has to be decommissioned and repurposed. So that's the C series. D is indirect emissions resulting from the development. So how people are going to use this. That would be vehicular emissions or aviation emissions. So we have to consider all of this in PAS 2080. This is whole life carbon, and this is what we attempt to consider through the X29 process, as you'll see. The new version of PAS 2080 has an important section on procurement, and here comes X29. There are requirements for different stakeholder groups. So I've just picked out as an example asset owner and manager requirements. So there are many, but here's some. To follow PAS 2080, which is an increasingly mandated requirement by the government and all clients, so everyone needs to be able to do this, more or less. If you're doing it and you're an asset owner, you have to assess how requirements in contracts for designers, constructors, or product material suppliers could support the asset owners, managers' alignment with decarbonisation. So you've got to look at how you're going to incorporate it into your contracts. Incentivize collaborative contractual arrangements across the value chain, and where appropriate, identify incentive mechanisms that reward whole life carbon performance. Okay, bear that in mind. Now here comes the X29. So X29 is a secondary clause to the new engineering contract, and it incorporates or allows the introduction of climate change requirements. And the focus is likely to be on carbon, but it can be on anything else as well. We'll provide the slides, these slides afterwards, and you'll be able to access all these links. But the essence of X29 clauses, they're set up for different forms of contract, and then there are the clauses themselves, example of which is on the left here, and then guidance documents for each form of contract. I wasn't involved in writing these, but I can say in the spirit of X29, sorry, in the spirit of the NEC, they are very simple, you know, in a great way. You know, they're very easy to understand. So if you're interested in deploying these, download them, follow the links, read the guidance for your particular form of contract, and hopefully, you know, you will be able to make sense of it. I'm going to pick out 4 key things from X29, 4 key elements, and then this is the essence of it. Climate change requirements. They are the requirements from the project relating to climate change that are stated in the scope. And quite often, perhaps most often, it'll be a carbon-related requirement. So it might be something like the contractor must reduce the carbon against this baseline that we're providing by 20%, for instance. It should be a numerical target. Climate change plan is the latest climate change plan accepted by the project manager. It explains how this thing is going to be done. The partners, the climate change partners, are the people or organizations who contribute to the achievement of the climate change requirements, and they're identified in that document. And the performance table, this is where things get really interesting, that states the targets that the contractor is to achieve, and pain gain mechanisms around that, as I'll show you. So here's things that are included in the X29 performance table item guidance. What it is you're addressing, e.g. carbon, could be waste, circularity, biodiversity. The target, how it's getting measured, the date by when it's going to be measured, adjustment to the amount to be paid if it's not met, adjustment to the amount paid if it's met or improved upon, and then limits around that would be reasonable. Again, in the guidance document, there's an example performance table. And as I say here, the subject to be addressed could be waste, biodiversity, circularity, anything really. And this is a kind of an opinion, I suppose, and it doesn't have to be PAS 2080. But PAS 2080 and my experience internationally of how people are deploying carbon management on infrastructure and built environment projects, PAS 2080 is pretty much the best show in town at the moment, at least. So if you're not deploying PAS 2080, at least use something equally as good. So PAS 2080 or equivalent plus X29 equals decarbonisation. So here are the links to those 2 documents. PAS 2080 is the foundation. It's likely that carbon planning regulations are going to tighten up. So all of this is going to become much, much more real than it has been in recent years. And carbon reduction will become contractual. It's starting to become contractual, but it's in its infancy still. X29 principles can be applied beyond NEC. So if you get them, you download them, have a look at them, you'll see that they're quite straightforward. Like a lot of the NEC in essence, it's just trying to make things as clear and unambiguous as possible. But what underpins all of this is numbers, carbon numbers. A rule of thumb is whenever you can estimate cost, you can estimate carbon. That's so important. I shall say it again. Whenever you can estimate cost, you can estimate carbon. It'll just be to the same degree of accuracy. And the real tip I would provide here is that if you connect your contract expert or experts with your carbon expert or experts, that's the way to guarantee success. Cut out all the middle people. Don't think of this just as a simple environmental issue. Put carbon and contracts right next to each other. That's the best way forward. And finally, just a small plug for the ICE training courses. There are two main ones in this area. One is on carbon management and infrastructure, which is a full day course which covers this in a lot of detail. And there's a new course which is about to be deployed in February, end of February, which is specifically on carbon and infrastructure procurement. So there's links there for those. Right, I think I've gone slightly over time, covered a lot in a short space of time, so I'll stop there and ask maybe if there are any questions immediately, and then if there aren't, well, you can ask me later.
Thank you very much, Lewis. I think you were perfectly on time.
Good.
It was very interesting. I mean, at CICA, we have been lobbying for rated criteria for World Bank finance projects, so mainly environmental and social criteria, but the main concern is always that they are not objective enough and hard to measure. I think that in your presentation, you have really described a very concrete way to measure and have very maybe more objective criteria. So thank you. I think it was very interesting. Do we see any questions in the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand, put your camera and ask a question now? Otherwise, we can keep the questions for the end of the session and we can move to Andrea. Andine, do you see any question in the chat?
No question in the chat for now.
Okay, thank you. So I will just introduce Andrea. So Andrea Costanzi is legal and contract manager with extensive expertise in the construction and energy sector. He joined WeBuild contract management department in 2021, following a successful career managing legal and contract operations in various countries. He's also an active member of the EIC, European International Contractors, Working Group Contract Conditions. He has contributed his expertise to several high-profile industry forums and academic programs. Since 2019, he's also lecturer for Politecnico di Milano University at the Master Contract Claim and Delay Management in Construction Works. So thank you very much, Andrea, to be with us today. And I think you also have slides to share with us. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Fanny. Thank you all for inviting me in this quite interesting webinar series. Thanks for this presentation. So I'll share my screen. Just a moment. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So after the quite interesting, let's say, presentation of NEC X29, I would like to provide a contractor standpoint on this X29 clause with, let's say, some remarks for contractor also in the context of the, let's say, more general framework represented by the new growing demand for a greener and more sustainable project. So, role of contractor in sustainable infrastructure. Contractors are key player in delivering sustainable infrastructure. We are aware that our decision methods and practices have a significant impact on the environmental, social, and economic outcome of project. As the demand for greener construction grows, we are aware that we must adapt to integrate sustainability into our project. On the other hand, we are also aware that sustainable infrastructure is not only about meeting current needs, but also ensuring longevity, resiliency, and minimal environmental footprint for future generation. Those let's say, principles, those green goals will not be reachable without a strong collaboration among all parties, which is now in this new trend is more crucial than ever. Sustainability, in fact, in construction relies on strong partnership. In this regard, NEC in general introduced one of its most important principles, which is collaboration. In particular, in clause X29, 29.2 requires specifically the contractor to collaborate with the other climate change part, and definition of climate change partner is one of the definition which will be provided, a specific list as anticipated by Lewis. Regarding collaboration, I would like also to mention the point of view of the European International Contractor, also FIEC, providing the manifesto on achieving carbon and resources neutrality in the European construction ecosystem, which, among other principles, introduce the concept of a strategic shift from fragmentation to collaboration, shifting from linear business to circular business model through the new operating model, which is collaborative approach, as mentioned also by Lewis. So contractor, which I said play a central role, should forge new alliances with client, consultant, supply chain, financial institution, regulatory institution. From a more, let's say, specific legal contractor perspective, a more, let's say, technical perspective, the demand for greener project has been having two major shifts. On procurement level, with new procurement rules which are reshaping how construction projects are planned, delivered, and managed, with a focus on reducing carbon emission and enhancing sustainability across all the project phases. First of all, on the tender phase. So on tender phase, traditionally, procurement decisions were focused on cost, quality, and delivery timeline. Now, the environmental performance is a key consideration, environmental performance from the bidder, from the contractor, with the result that sustainability requirements and criteria are included into procurement process. In this regard, with regard to the NEC climate change clause, both climate change requirements anticipated by Lewis, but we will enter into much detail, that climate change plan are included into the procurement process. Climate change requirement can be developed during the tender phase, also jointly by client and contractor. Climate change plan could be submitted by the contractor, by the bidder during tender phase and included into the contract data at the contract date. So NEC is exactly in the direction of this new trend for greener project. From a contract management perspective, the introduction of climate change clauses as X29 clause. So our clauses introduced to ensure that construction projects contribute to achieving the net zero carbon goal. As contractor, we have been monitoring this new trend. In particular, NEC has already provided the market with the comprehensive provision, the X29. There are, in any case, some shared element among various clauses we've been monitoring as European International Contractor. We discussed also a couple of weeks ago in Paris in a joint conference, ESC CICA, about the collaborative delivery method and net zero clauses. So we have been observing some shared element on these clauses, which are some additional contractor responsibility to minimize the carbon footprint of their activities. This could include, because it's a flexible, let's say, flexible additional scope, could include the sourcing low carbon material, using energy efficient construction techniques, reducing waste, and accurately measuring and reporting emission at various stages of the project. An additional obligation for contractor, additional responsibility in terms of carbon measurement and reporting. So contractor is requested to monitor carbon emission from on-site construction, material, transport, and even the operation of the completed building, and the inclusion of penalties and incentives for related to sustainability, related to the performance of contractor in terms of sustainability. So there are financial penalties for failing to meet the emission reduction target and or incentive for exceeding the sustainability goals. Going into detail with the NEC option X29 from contractor standpoint, contractor perspective, which are the key aspects for a good contract manager, for let's say to manage in the right way this new clause. Some of these elements has already been anticipated. I would like to enter into much detail with some remarks for contractors. So climate change requirements are the requirement that contractor must achieve. Important element for contractor are that this will be included into the scope of work. So it's an obligation for contractor. Can be set by client, can be requested to contractor from the client, or jointly developed among the parties. Failure to meet the climate change requirement from a legal contractor perspective is a breach of contract, which could be addressed in the performance table. We will see in detail the performance table, but if the failure regards the work, this is considered to be a defect to be rectified at contractor own expense. Climate change plan, as anticipated, set out a strategy toward which contractor will meet the climate change requirement, and the performance table could be included into the bidder proposal. In this case, would be part of the tender document, or could be submitted within a fixed period after contract award. There are, in this case, no direct contractual sanction if the contractor fails to comply with the climate change plan. The contractual sanction will be for the climate change requirement. Last important element is the introduction of a performance table, which includes a target to incentivize performance of the contractor. Targets can relate to the work, on how the work will be performed. Target can have a positive or negative financial incentive with possible limits. This is a very important aspect. And performance table is not mandatory, so it is expected to be commonly used because it's an additional tool for parties, but it's not mandatory to be included. In terms of remarks, for climate change requirement, it's important for contractor to analyze the requirement carefully, seek clarification during tender phase, as the unclear obligation could lead to dispute among the parties. Also pay close attention to the threshold for carbon emission and the method for measuring and verify this threshold. Also ensure alignment with local regulation, depending on the area on which you have been performing the project, and the green building standard. Climate change plan, some remarks. Contractors should evaluate from the outset which are the strategy for adapting to climate-related risk, should include a contingency related to the potential risk not to achieve the plan, and propose, in addition, mitigation strategy. For example, a mitigation in case there is a delay in obtaining sustainable material along the supply chain process. On performance table, contractors should ensure that the targets are measurable and aligned with the industry standard. Should establish a robust monitoring system, align subcontracts and work with the performance goal, and consider including limit on the level of money paid or deducted from the contractor, both in relation to each target on the list, but also overall. Now we can discuss on how the new procurement rule we said from the tender phase and climate change clauses are changing the role of contractor. This will increase the focus on sustainability from the start. The contractor is now expected to integrate sustainability into their bids, as we observed in the previous slide. Collaboration and early engagement, early contractor involvement is becoming more and more common. New skill and expertise are required. The contractor must train their workforce and invest in new technologies to meet the demand of net zero clauses and sustainable procurement, but also an approach on long-term commitment beyond the project completion. Contractor has to consider the long-term sustainability of the project beyond its construction. Of course, from contractor standpoint, there are also challenges in this new shift, in this new trend. There could be a cost pressure topic. Sustainable material and technologies can have an higher upfront. In some cases, client may resist in this additional cost. There could be a skill gap, a lack of technical knowledge, or skilled workforce in sustainability practices. Also, a supply chain topic. There could be difficulties in sourcing sustainable material or dealing with supplier, which could be unfamiliar, in particular in this early stage of the introduction of these new clauses with sustainable practices and mechanisms. There could be also some regulatory compliance issues navigating to complex and evolving environmental regulation and certification, but also a topic related to the complex reporting challenges in accurately measuring the reporting the emission. Which could be the solution from a contractor perspective? I try to list a set of possible solutions, categorizing in three principles: clearness and transparency, focus on the work procurement cycle impact, and market analysis. When we talk about clearness and transparency, we refer to a mechanism on how the CO, the carbon calculation is made during tender and during the execution, which must be clearly defined. For example, what tool, what methodology and documentation is to be used, but also the transparency in terms of scoring methodology and award criteria, which must be clearly defined into the procurement document. When I refer to clearness, I also refer to a clear and balanced risk allocation among the parties. We saw in the previous slide that NEC provided the option for client to introduce a paying game mechanism with incentive and disincentive. We as contractor, we would prefer avoid financial incentive and disincentive because we think that this mechanism could result in effective and increased dispute, in particular in relation to some unclear and some not objective mechanism in calculating the carbon emission. If client decided to go with this strategy, so introducing incentive, we should avoid unlimited contractor exposure on this incentive or damage, introducing a maximum liability cap. NEC 29, as we saw, provided this possibility, the introduction of some limitation on the performance table. Focus on the work procurement cycle. The principle is that the influence of the total carbon footprint is getting smaller as the project is progressing. So it will be important to identify opportunities for improvement over the entire life of the project, rather than merely on the construction phase. Solution is the early engagement. Again, another important principle included into the NEC form of contract. Early engagement, in particular of the relevant party on the base case carbon budget, will be fundamental in this case. Talking about market analysis. A market analysis from the employer before tender phase will be important to identify whether sustainable requirement, which will be included into the NEC 29, are feasible for contractor, but also for the whole supply chain, with the result that there will be a fair distinction between requirement, which shall be realistic and based on a previous market analysis, and criteria. One contractor can distinguish themselves. Once contractor pays the requirement phase, it should be able to provide the highest strategical investment and commitment in terms of sustainability to get the highest score into the tender phase. I also include quite briefly, some practical solutions, which could be smart construction practices, implementing building information modeling and other digital technologies to reduce waste and increase the efficiency. Green certification standard, combined with certification, will ensure the high performance, environmental performance, and the use of sustainable material, sourcing locally, using recycled or renewable material, but also choosing low carbon concrete or steel, for example. Which are the benefits if contractor would be able to implement in the right way NEC 29, in particular climate change clause, facing the challenges we have listed. There will be benefit in terms of reputation and market leadership. Leading sustainability will improve our competitive advantage by adding value to our bids for future contracts. There will be a benefit in terms of operational efficiency, of course. Sustainable projects often lead to more efficient construction processes. Also, risk mitigation aspect, lower risk in terms of environmental penalties or damages. And finally, future-proofing businesses. If we'll be able to adapt to global sustainability trend and regulation, this will safeguard our business resilience for the future. To conclude, some takeaway from contractor perspective. So, NEC X29 clause mark a significant evolution in the construction contract, making sustainability a contractor priority. By integrating specific requirements directly into the project delivery, this clause ensures that sustainability is no longer an optional consideration, but it's a core obligation. And we will see under which, let's say, condition. It's on the last takeaway. Contractors play a critical role in implementing this clause, as their action, innovation, and collaborative effort will determine the success of such a clause. And NEC X29 clause provides a structure, a framework that supports contracting aligning their work with the global sustainable transition. And finally, an important principle, while the clause is flexible and adaptable to different goals, it is essential that all parties ensure a balanced allocation of risk associated with this new obligation, including into this clause. Achieving green targets should be a collaborative effort, so we should avoid an undue burden or any single party, in particular on contractor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this very complete and detailed presentation. I hope it will be very helpful for other contractors too, to learn about your experience. I have a few questions for you, but maybe at the same time, if you have other questions for Andrea or for Lewis, you can type them in the chat. Oh, I can see one question. Maybe we can take it now. So Greg, if you would like to introduce yourself, maybe put your camera if you wish.
Sorry, no, it was supposed to be a reaction, so to applaud, but I pressed hand by mistake.
We take it too.
Thank you.
So I will start with the first question then. So Andrea, could you say something more about contractor benefits represented by reputation and market leadership on slide 10? And then maybe I will also ask you at the same time a second question, because you mentioned a solution from contractors' perspective, avoid financial incentives, disincentives mechanisms, which could be ineffective and increase disputes. Mm-hmm. So could you elaborate a bit more on this? Because we would like to avoid to create more disputes with this new, these new clauses. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. First question was about the reputation and market, let's say, leadership. Yeah. When I refer to this, let's say this this principle, I was referring to the fact that, of course, if we'll be able to implement green strategy, net zero clauses, there will be an improvement in terms of reputation. But also, if we will be able to demonstrate a strong track record and meeting the pre-qualification requirement, which will be reaching also in terms of investment in sustainability from a contractor perspective. This will, on the other hand, increase our possibility of being awarded of next of new contracts. So if there would be an investment in terms of training, in terms of new technologies, there will be a gain on the new awarding of contract. Second question was about, yes, that's a central aspect, the fact that we will prefer avoid financial incentive, disincentive. As I was mentioning, is left on the flexibility on such a clauses, for example, NEC 29, the inclusion of penalties related to the performance from contractor. The perspective is that first of all, as I said in the takeaways, to reach the green target, it's a jointly effort among all parties. So simply put, the burden on contractor would not solve the problem. Also because if you think about liquid damages, if contractor is aware of the possible application of liquid damages, this will be part of a contingency during the evaluation of the offer. So this will increase the price, the offer, with so will increase the possible budget on the project, with the result that there will not be benefit for let's say for the work party, for client and for contractor. So of course, liquid damages is an option. Maybe in an open discussion among the party, we could find during negotiation of the contract, during the definition of the requirement, as the NEC 29 provide a discussion on early engagement of the contractor, we should find different solution among the parties.
Okay, I think you mentioned the possibility to cap, to limit this exposure.
That's let's say the second best option in case this will be the strategy from client, which will be, of course, be respected. It's as contractor we are used to the let's say application of this. Of course, that's for sure. But we should try, as for example, delay liquid damages, to negotiate a cap on the penalties, on the let's say single performances, limit on single performances, but also an overall limitation to have a better idea of the maximum exposure for contractor.
Okay, thank you. We have also a third question for you. So about the skills gap, do you have in mind some examples of new skills in the context of new sustainable approach from the contractor's perspective?
Yes, this is new skills. It's part of the challenges for contractor. Of course, this new trend, as the effect is that the contractor will need new skills and let's say new roles. What I was referring to is not exactly new, let's say new key personnel, but is more related to new training for personnel. For example, from my perspective, from a legal contract manager perspective, we will need to train a new generation of contract manager in being able to manage, to deal with this new mechanism, which will affect, which will not be just the clause, will affect the whole, let's say, contract mechanism, the whole contract management. So contractor should invest in new training for comply with this new trend, but also let's say new professional able to measure in the right way and monitoring the performance of contractor, because as I was anticipating, the measurement of the carbon emission of any other requirement, including to the contract, will be central to the right contract management, or to the right, let's say, relationship with the client. So the more we will be able to measure in the right way, in a more clear way, in a clearer way, in a more objective way, the more we will avoid the dispute among the parties.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Maybe Lewis, you would like to comment on the presentation of Andrea, and also I was wondering, do you see really an increase on the use of this clause X29?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, very happy to add a little bit in there. I've got to say that was such an excellent presentation from Andrea. It really covered so much in such depth that I've never seen before anyone do that. So it's really, really good. Thank you. And in fact, you've really said it all. So all I will just maybe do is maybe amplify 2 or 3 points that you made. If you recall, the front, I won't share it again, but the front of the PAS 2080 document is a sort of a curve, a diminishing curve, if you like, trending towards an asymptote. And that is based on a schematic diagram from a long time ago, which is the diminishing ability to reduce carbon the later you leave it. And if you follow that logic through, by the time a project reaches a contractor or to price, so much of the opportunity to reduce carbon has been missed. So contractors that I speak with are keen to win jobs, obviously, but also keen to point out, especially to the ultimate client, that we can do what we can, but the biggest choices have usually already been made a little bit further up. So don't blame the contractor if you're not able to reduce carbon down to net zero. That's the kind of first point. Second is, I think probably from my experience, one of the most important things that Andrea said there was as a contractor, you know, if you're tendering for a project and this is being put on the table, whether it's X29 or any other kind of carbon reduction challenge, is to really ask as many technical questions as you can, as you're able to, about the baseline that you've been presented, because quite often the baseline's going to be wrong, you know, from my experience. Sometimes that doesn't matter too much if the baseline is inaccurate, as long as everyone is sort of pitching at the same number. So it's absolutely incorrect, but relatively amongst contractors, that's not so bad. But yeah, bear in mind that that's not always perfect, and some good mechanisms that I've seen recently, including at the Lower Thames Crossing in London, is at the pre-qualification stage. The designers and sort of carbon experts have been working away on a number that's associated with the schematic or the specimen design. And then at the pre-qualification stage, that model, basically a big spreadsheet, is issued to all the contractors. So all the contractors have an opportunity during the pre-qualification stage to really kick that about and analyze it and object to it, so that by the time that everyone is tendering, in theory, everyone's on the same page and everyone is happy enough with that baseline. Again, I've seen instances where a contract's awarded, and when the contractor then and only then gets the baseline properly, that's when, because of course it's in the contractor's interests to really, really understand it, then they get it, and then they identify all these errors in it, you know, that seemed to be okay at the time, but weren't obvious. The last point, and maybe just add, is about carbon and cost. This is such a strong correlation between carbon and cost. That was pointed out in something called the Infrastructure Carbon Review in the UK that was the prelude to PAS 2080. That's available online. Maybe we could share that as a link if anyone is interested. But the early message of the Infrastructure Carbon Review was quite simplistic. Almost everything that we're talking about here, quantities of materials, moving stuff around, energy, if you can reduce these things, you should save money and you should save carbon. That's fair enough. But when you start to get into the detail of following this through, then you see, as Andrea has mentioned, you'll see some things, particularly in the contractors arena, some of the low carbon things cost more at the moment. Some of the lowest carbon concrete, some of the lowest carbon steel, some of the lowest carbon construction techniques cost more than traditional fossil fuel-based things. Now, if the client doesn't understand that, that can lead to some issues and kind of conflicts. And I've seen, it's improving, I think, but I've seen issues where the client is trying to drive carbon reduction. We want carbon reduction, we want percentage reductions. And the contractor really isn't incentivized to push forward innovative solutions that they have because they might be more expensive. So this balance between carbon and cost, you should always sort of bear that in mind. But ultimately, the client needs to understand this. So if we can educate the client and the people writing the contracts to factor this in, I think that would be useful. But oh yeah, your final question: are we seeing an increase in it? Yes, but excruciatingly slowly. You know, because to be able to deploy this properly and with best effect, you need the numbers, and to get the numbers, you need to have had the process behind that to generate the numbers sufficiently. That's the PAS 2080 sort of process. So if PAS 2080 or something like PAS 2080 is working well, then X29 for carbon at least will work well. But if you don't have that, it's not going to work so well. PAS 2080 is being deployed more frequently now. UK Department for Transport have mandated it. The Australian, not the complete Australian government, but New South Wales have mandated something like it's PAS 2080 plus, really. They've taken PAS 2080 to the next level. So we're going to see it in Australia very soon. So that when that is really in force, that's when people start to ask the serious question, how on earth do we make this contractual and fair and transparent? And that's when things like X29 will pop up. So we'll see an increase, I'm sure, but I think a lot of people are pretty scared of it at the moment, but it shouldn't be too scary. So I'm really sorry, I've got one more point, which I just remembered, which again, Andrea mentioned, a possible reluctance to pin financial pain gain against the carbon number in X29. And I totally understand that. And that's particularly because of the reason I just said, is that the baseline may be wobbly. You know, a lot of the methodology is a bit wobbly. So while that's wobbly, there's an opportunity for lots of arguments about this. So as we see X29 being deployed, certainly in the UK, my experience, and the Environment Agency, they're doing it very well, is they're not going with the pain side of it. They're only looking at the incentivization first. That's a bit less controversial and easier to encourage people to move forward rather than punish them if it's wrong, because it may well be wrong. Yeah.
Thank you, Lewis. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I don't know, Andrea, if you would like to have a final comments. Fine.
Yeah, just from my side, just the final comments. I'm really happy that with Lewis we are aligned on this let's say this principle, which I am on the opinion that this principle of collaboration, but also early engagement of contractor, the fact that the requirement should be discussed among the parties in an open way. Those are the principles that, in my opinion, will drive this transition, and will increase the use of these of such a clauses, which are, let's say, fundamental. If we as industry we want to play our role in this transition, we need to start from now using these clauses, having this tool available now. It's a great opportunity.
Thank you. A final word also, Lewis?
Well, yeah, just
very good.
What he said. It was great. Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely agree.
Okay, so I think I will have to thank you both for your great presentations today. As we said, you agreed to share your slides, so we will circulate your slides to the participants. As CICA, we are very committed to continue working on this topic. We will also continue our collaboration with NEC. For your information, we will have a workshop on this topic of decarbonizing the construction sector in Bordeaux next April, organized by the European International Contractors. And we will keep you informed of our next initiative. So thank you for attending. Thank you for the participation. And I wish you a nice day. Thank you.
Thanks for asking us. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.